arguably porn is now the most prominent sex educator for many young people. And I think that when we go into the classroom and explore issues of sexuality, we need to have that in mind, because to fail to address pornography in any way is kind of to leave a big elephant in the room, that's having a significant influence without recognising it. We know from research that young people's exposure to pornography is at very high levels. Perhaps even at saturation rates nearly. So the research from some of the most recent research from Australia is 2006 research that found of the 13 to 16-year-old students that they interviewed, that they surveyed, that 92% of boys and 61% of girls talked about being exposed to pornography online. Now 2006 is before the advent of smartphones, before young people had access to smartphones and before lots of one-to-one laptop programs. And we know that young people's exposure to pornography is primarily technology mediated. And the material that they come across when they see porn is not the centrefold. It's not what it used to be when lots of their parents were growing up. It's actually much more explicit. It's often people, moving images of people having sex, often multiple partners, and often it's very aggressive. So a content analysis of best-selling pornography found that 88% of scenes contained physical aggression and 48% of scenes contained verbal aggression. And significantly, 94% of incidents of aggression were targeted towards the women performers. So the aggression in porn is very gendered. And also significantly, they then researched the response of the targets to the aggression and found that in 95% of cases, the targets responded with either a positive or a neutral response to that aggression, which gives a very confusing message to young people, to anybody actually, but to young people who often don't have other frames of reference to think about what sex is like, that the women enjoy, they want to be slapped and gagged and choked, and these are some of the most common acts of aggression. I think there are kind of three levels at which we can address pornography education, if you like, which doesn't involve showing young people pornography, but is education that will address the influence of pornography on young people. The first is where we don't even mention pornography at all, actually, where we're talking about trying to assist young people to develop the knowledge and the skills and the frameworks that they can then bring to their experiences of pornography if and when, and we need to presume when, that occurs. So critical media literacy skills, to be able to ask questions about the stories that they see, what's being told in films or in advertising about what it means to be male, what it means to be female. All of those stories also often say things about race, culture and age and sexuality. So to have a kind of framework for thinking about those things, and also competencies around, valuing respectful relationships, about equality and respect, mutuality and human dignity. And those are the kinds of areas that we can explore, from when children are very young all the way through. Then I think the next level about pornography education is to incorporate pornography or issues about pornography into broader education, whether it's around respectful relationships or sexuality education more broadly. So that, for example, when you're looking at scenarios of negotiating consent, that you might include a scenario in which pornography is shaping what one partner is wanting to engage in, and the other partner is responding to their initiations that perhaps are around unwanted sexual practices. So integrating porn's not, and when you're thinking about gender constructions, what sort of gender construction, what sort of messages are young people getting from the media more broadly, but also from pornography around hyper-masculine males and hyper-feminine women, or submissive and pleasing women, and the focus being on male pleasure and male entitlement. And then the next layer, I think, is where we address pornography explicitly, and specifically. And I think that there is a place for, certainly with a student cohort that are mature enough to be able to engage with these issues. There are some very difficult things to balance in there because we don't want to assume that all young people have seen pornography. We don't want to be giving kudos to students who have knowledge about pornography, but at the same time we need to be realistic about that lots of them will have seen it and that there are issues that we need to address in that. I think that some educators might feel concerned about addressing pornography because we've tried to shift towards a positive approach to sexuality education and to to move away from sex ed being about not getting pregnant and not getting STIs. And to speak about pornography is to tackle an issue that can have harmful implications for young people. So there might be some hesitancy for some educators about going again into that sort of negative discourse. And I think though that in order to have the positive sexuality education, we actually need to address the barriers that young people face in their move toward, in their efforts to move into a positive sort of sense of their own sexuality. And certainly sexual assault is one of those areas. We can't pretend that those power imbalances and harmful experiences don't exist. We need to address those. And I think similarly with pornography, we can't pretend that it isn't there and that it doesn't have a harmful influence. And actually, in our efforts to a positive sexuality education, we need to address those sort of barriers. So I'd want to encourage sexuality educators to tackle that, even though I know that we don't want to move into just a negative discourse about sexuality. I think it's actually about valuing a positive discourse about sexuality that means that we would be motivated to address that. It fits very well then to educate about pornography in broader respectful relationships frameworks. Pornography education also fits in with harm minimisation. There are a range of different policy frameworks that means that we can explore those issues. I think a lot of teachers don't feel well equipped to tackle this issue, and it's really important that teachers have access to education about these issues to gain knowledge about the prevalence and about the nature of the material, to develop an analysis about what that means for young people and for sexuality education, and to be well supported by their school leadership. To tackle any controversial issue it's important to have school leadership support, and there's no doubt that sexuality education has been a controversial and difficult area, and pornography education is certainly that as well. So to have good training, good resources and supportive leadership is really important.